It's a pleasure to be here. And actually, Justin, really positive opening for landlords, dare I say it. Landlords are the heartbeat of housing. Let's be honest about that. As landlords, we don't go to the local high street and we get medals. It doesn't happen. We are unsung heroes, okay? All we want to do is provide good housing and make a living, yeah? There's this perception in the press that we all drive Rolls Royces and Bentleys. I haven't seen any Bentleys in the car park. Anyone got Bentley? Right? We are just normal people. But the perception in the press is that we are greedy and that the word landlord is something to be ashamed of. It shouldn't be. Is that fair enough to say, yes or no? Yeah? How many of you, put your hands up and be honest, when you are in the golf club or you are in the street and you speak to someone and someone says, what do you do for a living as a profession? You're a landlord. Put your hand up. Right, so just everyone look around. Put your hand up. We've got 100 people in there. There's 3 hands up. That is why I've opened up this talk as I've opened up. The word landlord is actually dated. It's actually, we are housing providers. The tenants are our customers and residents. You know, I own the land and I'm your lord. That's a bit dated. Do we not agree with that? So we're now in 2024. So I'm going to do a talk, and I can talk to the cows come home, and I've got half an hour, so I will be coming off, all right? And I go a bit cockney, so don't hold that to me. Last week, I was with Stephen at the NRLA conference. I was in Beverley, Manchester, Bristol, and Newcastle, and I ended up in Newcastle talking my cockney accent, and they're like looking at me, what? But anyway, let's talk about housing conditions and the importance of property inspections. Let's be very clear. The properties you provide for your tenants are their homes. The more they feel that that property is their home, the longer they're going to stay in that property. Is that fair enough to say? The better they're going to look after it. Yeah? As landlords, I say this all the time. As landlording, there's a saying that I say, no news is good news. Do you understand what I'm saying by that? As long as we look on the 1st of October, which was yesterday, that our rent has been paid, that our tenant gives us access to carry out an inspection, which is a massive problem, a big, big problem, I'm sure for environmental health officers and obviously for landlords and letting agents, then we're happy, you know, and that's the reason. And we are facing, and Stephen's going to talk about this and a few other speakers, we are facing the biggest changes we faced in the private rental sector with the Renters' Rights Bill in 30 years. And I'm saying to you as landlords, one thing that you all are is very adaptable, flexible. Yeah? You can deal with change. Yeah? This is now the time of me being a landlord, even though only 3 of your hands went up. So a lot of you, you're not landlords. I don't know what you are. Maybe you're at the wrong conference, I don't know. Right? But this is a profession. We have to change the perception. And I said this at the NRLA conference. I'll say this at the annual conference when I'm on the stage in Birmingham. We have to change the perception of how people think about us. So that's our language. It's the way that we act. It's the way that we engage with our tenants. Because, of course, with the housing shortage we have, and we have a chronic housing shortage, we have a rental stock crisis, and I called 5 years ago, and I write lots of press, and I'll talk about that in a second. I said that you will have landlords leaving the sector. It started with Section 24 in 2017 with tax. And then, of course, we had one of the best prime ministers in history. I'm being filmed about it. I hope I'm not being controversial here. A lady called Liz Truss that came in. And she tried to stimulate the economy, and she was in for 40 days. And the interest rates went right up. And that's accelerated landlords coming out. But I do say to landlords, you know, and I've lived and breathed and I've acted for landlords for 34 years, is as landlords, we do have short memories. We had 0% interest rates for 11 years, didn't we? Yes? Yeah? And actually, the interest rate of 5% is actually normal. And 38% of landlords out there don't have a mortgage and they're in a really good position. But I do see the industry as being half full rather than half empty. Yeah? Why is that? You have an average of 21 tenants looking for one property. You have the pick of the best tenants than ever before. Yeah? You do have a rental stock crisis. You have less void periods than ever before. Yeah, and there are lots of landlords leaving the sector. The 1 to 3 landlords, the smaller landlords, the landlords that call themselves amateur landlords, hobby landlording. Those days are over. Yeah, even if you've got 1 or 2 properties, you are a landlord. This is a profession. Let me ask you this one question. How many of you want to add to your portfolios? Put your hands up. Yeah, still a decent amount of people, you know, and there will be some opportunities out there. So just my background, and some of you don't know me, I started in the legal profession, when was it? I can't remember now. 1987. I was an outdoor clerk in a firm of solicitors in Brighton on £4,000 a year and worked in the recession in 88, 90. Anyone had an interest mortgage at 15%? Put your hands up. Now all the hands are going up, aren't they? Yeah? But you're here now in 2024. I was the guy who was very unpopular, unfortunately, at that time, going in and out of court at the age of 16, 17, obtaining repossession orders for the banks and building societies. That was my background in legal. I issued my first possession claim while working for a firm of solicitors in London when we moved back to London in 1991. And then I became a private investigator and a bailiff and a debt collector, and I did all these mad things. I beat some of the worst traveller sites in London, some of the worst council estates. I had a gun pulled on me once where I had to repossess an Arabian horse in Newmarket down the road, believe it or not. And the trainer wasn't happy because he was owed £25,000. He pulled a gun out, and I ran very quickly, to say the least. And we had the armed response unit. That was in the 90s. And I had to do surveillances. I did all this mad stuff, but I'd always dealt with, in the legal profession, helping landlords gain possession. And in 1999, 2000, so like 24 years ago, I helped my old previous business partner, who was a portfolio landlord and letting agent, and he had 25 illegal immigrants living in a 2-bed flat in northwest London. And I said, I'll get them out. And we did it all for fixed fees. And out of that, we set up Landlord Action. And we were cheesed off at the time with solicitors charging too much money, so we offered fixed fees. And that was 24 years ago. And then I just embraced, and I just, by chance, ended up doing TV and radio and public speaking, and really started campaigning. I've been called many things in my professional life, especially turning up at someone's doorstep at 6 o'clock in the morning with a TV camera. But I'm called the landlord's friend, and I'm really proud of being called that, because landlords do need friends, especially when you have over 147 rules and regulations that are being brought in. Because as landlords, as I said, we're very flexible, very adaptable. This is a business. You have to be multi-skilled, don't you? You have to be a mediator. You have to be a compliance officer. You have to be a credit controller. You have to be a social worker. Is that fair enough to say? How many of you manage HMOs? Put your hands up. Now, you guys need medals. HMO management is the hardest thing to do. You're putting 6 or 7 strangers into a building and hoping they're all going to get on. Is that fair enough to say? And they have different work patterns, different beliefs. So yeah, we as Landlord Action, we've dealt with conflict and dealt with aggravation, helping landlords. We're like emergency plumbers. You don't really want to call us, but you know that we're there. So I do lots of advisory work. I do a lot of advisory work with regard to the government. I was involved with the Deregulation Act and helped draft the Section 21. Section 4A, which obviously Section 21 is going to go, and I'm going to touch on that very briefly. I'll let the legal people speak in more detail about that. And I brought in the squatting law that came into effect in 2012, where if you have a secondary property and someone breaks in, it becomes a criminal act. So I do lots of campaigning. I'm on a couple of working groups at the moment with the government. Yeah, so I do press and PR. They're all the brands that I represent. So in 2017, I sold my business to Hamilton Fraser. Any of you use My Deposits? Put your hands up. So yeah, so I'm a director of the company that owns My Deposits. We protect £1.2 billion worth of deposits. We act in touch for about 500,000 landlords in our organisation with 200 staff and about 23,000 letting agents. So we run 3 government schemes, which is the property redress scheme, but all letting agents have to belong to a redress scheme, so the consumer has redress. Client money protects, so if your agent goes bust, your rents are covered, a bit like if you go on a holiday with regard to ABTA, which that legislation I actually wanted to come in 2003. It came in 2019. Hey-ho, we got there in the end, yeah. And we also run, as well as I run Landlord Action, we run a website called Landlord Zone, which is a breaking news website. We should all join and become members of. Anyone watch the programme Nightmare Tenant Slum Landlords? Put your hands up. Do you watch it and cringe? That's normally the effect that I have when I'm on TV. These are all real stories. These are all stories of landlords that aren't professional landlords, that aren't members of the NRLA, you know, don't use a letting agent to fully manage, don't understand what a deposit is. And the law only came in 2007, so don't worry about that. Yeah? We had loads of other legislation. These are landlords that have tried to do it themselves and got themselves into problems, as well as tenants abusing the process. There are far more bad tenants than bad landlords. Let's be clear about that. But there were also rogue landlords. And I decided to do this show. I did 60 episodes. And I decided to do it because it was a balanced show. I wanted to show all the stories there were Landlord Action stories. I was travelling up and down the country, exposing stories of tenants that were making landlords' lives hell, but also explaining and highlighting the broken system that we have. We still have, and it is a big problem with regard to councils, we still have tenants that are staying put because they want to be rehoused by the council, which is a massive problem. And it's a big problem for the councils. We've got a massive temporary accommodation crisis. We've got 1.3 million tenants on council waiting lists. But landlords are and have a responsibility, and they are housing people in the social housing sector. So that was Nightmare Tenants. And they're just quickly all the brands that we represent at Landlord Action. We do the landlord insurance, total landlord insurance for the NRLA. But you need to, you know, you're going to have to think about insurances. You're going to have to think about rent guarantee insurance. You're going to have to think about guarantors in the new world that we're going to be facing with regard to the Renters' Rights Bill. You know, I'm going to just tell you about a little bit of it because obviously you'll be hearing it a lot. You know, and Stephen will explain most probably a bit in time frames, but the reality is they want the law to be in by next summer. Is that fair enough to say, Stephen? Yeah? Next summer, with maybe no transitional period, and it could be a big bang. So how does that affect your business model? What do you have to do? How do you protect yourself from risk? And I just thought I'd come up with some stats, okay? I don't know the Ipswich market. I use Google, so don't hold me against that. But rents have gone up. They've gone through the roof, haven't they? Which is great for landlords. But I can tell you now, with regard to tenants, affordability is a massive problem. You know, I have more empathy and sympathy with tenants than ever before. Ever before. Yeah? Because tenants are paying 35% of their wages towards rent. It's becoming unsustainable. Now, the worry is, and the big worry for landlords, is that rent caps are going to come in. I don't think rent caps are going to come in, and they've said they won't come in, but there are going to be mechanisms where a landlord has to look at a rent rise once a year, you know, with a Section 13, and it could be suppressing rent, how rent suppressed. But you know what? Most landlords previously didn't put their rents up. They were forced to put their rents up when their mortgage rates went up. You know, I've had a tenant in a property of mine, I didn't put the rent up for 9 years. Yeah? We have good tenants. We want to keep them. Yeah, great tenants. Yeah? Let's be very clear. 95, 96% of tenants out there are really good. Yeah, you might have an issue with regard to end of tenancy dispute or, you know, a scuffed skirting board or issues like that. I mean, I represent My Deposits. We did 12,000 adjudications last year. We protect £1.2 billion worth of deposits. And a lot of the deposits don't even touch or relate to pets. Having a pet is not a big issue, believe you me. You can ask the tenant to take pet insurance out. So yeah, so here's some of the stats. A fifth of the housing market is the private rental sector. The average rent in the UK is £1,276. In London, it's £2,100. It was actually up to £2,600. It's a lot of money. And of course, you have the Zen generation, the millennial generation. You know, the average first-time buyer now, I think, is 39 years old. There's a have and have-nots. And that's why, with a lot of the tenant groups, and I've tried to engage with Generation Rent and Shelter, and I've done a lot of publicity and stuff like that, we need to come together. This is the problem. And I sit with Ben Beadle, I know very well, and Stephen at the NRLA, and I've been on loads of working groups in my 24-year history of Landlord Action. you've got to stop the them and us. We're all in it together. And it doesn't help. Because unfortunately, bad landlord stories sells newspapers. I've tried to do good landlord stories when I did Landlord Zone during COVID, which was a tough time. We even forgot about COVID. What was all that about, right? I did a landlord hero story in Landlord Zone, and I got pelters on Twitter. I got pictures of coffins, and I got threats. I mean, I'm quite thick-skinned with what I've been going through, and you have to be in my job. But, you know, we do a lot of good stuff as landlords. We do care about our tenants, and that doesn't come out. But I think we need to talk about it more. You know, we need to express and have the way that we become more professionalised, you know. So I think that's really important. 40% of tenants don't even have any savings. So for them to own a property, it is going to be a bit of a pipe dream. We know Section 21s are being scrapped, and I'm not going to harp on too much about this because I know there's going to be other speakers talking about it, but people expect me to talk about it because of what I do. So at Landlord Action last year, we did 4,000 instructions. We've got 23 staff. I've got some leaflets here if anyone wants after. And I can tell you now, in the last year to 18 months, we have done more Section 21 cases than Section 8s in the history of Landlord Action since I started in 2000. Mainly why? Because landlords are selling. They're getting out. And what is the unintended consequence? The unintended consequence is, and I say this flippantly, but you'll get the way I'm talking because I'm talking to you in a landlord language. I'm a landlord. The more you keep prodding the bear will eventually bite. And that biting is a landlord selling a property where they've had a really good tenant for a long time, but they're having to sell for loads of various different reasons. And I come back to the point of the question I asked when only 3 hands went up. You know, being a landlord, you shouldn't be ashamed of being a landlord when you've got 3 people's hands going up. And I think it's great that you've put a conference on like this, and I think it's great that the opening sentence that you gave, Justin, is about supporting good landlords. The problem we've got in this industry, we've got 2.74 million landlords. Yeah? We've got 110,000 members of the NRLA. You've got 40% of the market, which is managed by letting agents and managing agents. And I think as landlords, what you also have to do is you have to put a price on your time. Really important. Landlords don't do that. You know, you might want to spend more time with the grandchildren or be on the golf course or travel or whatever. You need to do the stuff you enjoy doing. You know, let me ask you this question. How many of you, put your hands up, be honest, because we're now engaging, right? How many of you love taking a call at 5 o'clock in the morning from your drunk tenant that's lost their keys? Put your hands up. Good answer, right? You should delegate it, or the boiler's broken down, you know. You know, it's about managing relationships. So look, Section 8, there's 17 grounds. They're going to go to 36 grounds in the new world. I still have reservations about how worked they are. And there was, you know, I think there should be a ground for access. Massive problem. You know, we need one thing and one thing only to carry on. That's confidence. Do we agree with that? Yes or no? I said yes or no. Yes. Good. We need confidence. We need to make sure that if we do have a problem with a tenant, or we do need to sell it, we can get our property back, and that the courts do work. Yeah? We have an issue with the courts. They are very slow, especially if you're in a London court. Not so much getting a hearing, but an eviction date. I'll give you one example, sorry. We applied for an eviction date in July 2023. We've been told we're going to get an eviction date in January 2025. That's in Clerkenwell County Court in London. Yeah? So there is going to be mandatory grounds if you want to sell your property, you know, if you want to move back in. I'm not sure about the antisocial behaviour. I think that needs to be strong. There's a whole lot of stuff that needs to work out. Again, there's a legal workshop later. I'm not going to steal that chap's fire. You know, he can explain in a bit more detail. But when you go to court on a Section 8, you have a hearing date. It's a 5-minute hearing. A lot of landlords now, in the new world, the advice I give to you, and, you know, some of you will never have to evict a tenant in your life. Yeah? And unfortunately, we have the backup of using a Section 21 notice as a safety blanket. That's going to go. And that you've got to understand how you navigate and how you deal with that type of risk. Okay? That's important. Currently, Section 21. Mandatory ground for possession, you know, they call it non-fault. My argument is there's always a fault. There's always a reason. I said that on Panorama when I got them in my office, because I get contacted to do quotes, a bit like what Ben does on the NRLA. And they said to me, I said, and that's where the word non-fault came from, that Panorama programme. They showed a chap called Fergus Wilson from Kent, who was serving Section 21 notices, he's got a terrible reputation, on his whole, on a whole road, but treating his tenants with contempt, which really put landlords in a bad light. And I said to them, I said, there's always a reason. And I was on that programme for 17 seconds. Right, it was a very tenant-centric bit, you know. So most of the time, actually, historically, landlords were using Section 21 for rent arrears. They didn't want to go to court. They were writing off the rent arrears, which meant they didn't get a money order at court, which meant you did the tenant a favour because you didn't enforce the money order and it didn't become a CCJ. And then when I went with a Section 21 possession order, which doesn't show the rent arrears, they can go to the council and ask to try and be rehoused. Yeah? I had the government in my office in October 2019 when they were talking about housing courts, which in hindsight, if housing courts came in, they'd be working now, we'd have investment, we'd have confidence. The Conservative government didn't do that. We didn't make the Renters Reform Bill, which NRLA, myself and a whole lot of others, we lived and breathed it for 5 years, didn't make the wash up. Now we have the Renters' Rights Bill, where there's more mechanism. A lot of it is really, really workable, but some of it we need to see the practicality. What I do say to you is watch and wait, be calm. Watch for the detail. Yeah, you've got to watch to see what's coming out. There's a whole lot of stuff coming out on the 9th of October, the second reading, and there's a whole lot of legislation stuff that's going to happen. And there'll be loads of conversations. They call it the accelerated possession hearing, but it's not accelerated. You don't need a hearing date, but the time it takes to go to court, get a court order, get the bailiffs in, you're looking at 6 to 8 months anyway. It's not accelerated, yeah? So then I want to talk about unintended consequences just quickly, and then we're going to talk about housing conditions. Landlords will be much more stringent on referencing. That's guaranteed. What's the unintended consequence of that? Is people on benefits will miss out more. That's the reality. Yeah? If I've got 20 applicants coming from my one property, the reality is I want to make sure that I'm going to get my money. I want to make sure that if I was on universal credit, I'm going to get direct payment. Is that fair enough to say? And that's not the problem of the councils. That's just the way the system's broken. And it affects people. But statistically, a universal credit or housing benefit tenant stays longer and looks after the property better. That's actually a fact. Yeah? But it's about costs. All the costs have got, landlords' costs have gone up, their rates have gone up, taxation's gone up, everything's gone up. Yeah? So, do you rent out to a private couple at the hospital, or do you rent out to universal credit tenant? And the private couple are paying £300-400 a month more. You've got a rent guarantee in place, and you've got a parent who's a guarantor. You know, that's going to be the reality, unfortunately. And I tell it how it is, because I've lived and breathed this for a long time. There's been requests for guarantors. Rents will rise because, of course, they're going to get rid of the anti-bidding laws, so landlords will put their rents up. Because if you put your rent at £1,000, you can't accept bids over. A lot of this is everything. The issue that we have in our industry is we don't have enough enforcement. You can bring all the rules and regulations out in the world, but you need to make sure that you can enforce the rules and regulations against the rogue landlords. The landlords that were on my show were criminal landlords. Let's be clear about that. And it's about making sure that it's fair for everyone. Okay, we need to make sure we do more mediation. If you do have a problem tenant, you might have to write off the rent arrears so you can get early possession and get them to sign a deed of surrender. Okay, we need to make sure that grounds of Section 8 work. We need confidence in the court system. Okay, the Housing Minister, Matthew Pennycook, has said that they're going to invest, but so did the two other previous Housing Ministers. We've had 13 Housing Ministers in 14 and a half years. What does that tell you? We need continuity, don't we, Stephen? Yeah, that's the problem that we have. So, housing condition claims will rise. So what's going to happen? In my opinion, I think that there will be an increase in costs when it comes to, there'll be solicitors acting for tenants on housing conditions. We're seeing that now. That will rise when Section 21 goes. You'll see lots more defences and counterclaims. Yeah? They are going to be bringing in a landlord redress scheme, which I will explain, okay? There were some legacy COVID-19 disrepair issues that were never actioned. And unfortunately, government guidance during COVID-19 was pretty poor, to say the least. And how weird was COVID-19 as landlords? Because you had the student market, which fell out of bed, the rent guarantee, the rent-to-rent market fell out of bed, the commercial housing, the commercial market was always going to collapse, okay? And then what happened was they had a concession for stamp duty of £500,000, and we had a housing boom. I mean, it was mental, wasn't it? You couldn't predict what was going to happen. And quite rightly, during a pandemic, you shouldn't evict a tenant. That was the right thing to do, but it was frustrating. And we were seeing it. I was getting calls from various different police forces that wanted advice on situations. Because what was happening is landlords were getting frustrated and they were getting a disease. Landlords do get a disease, by the way. Do you know what that disease is? It's called landlord rage, right? And they started taking the law into their own hands, started changing locks and kicking tenants out. And then, of course, you had a lot of overseas landlords, overseas tenants that ended up leaving properties to try and beat the lockdown. So we're going to see a lot of lawyers acting for tenants, okay? Retaliation eviction, let me tell you about that. I know all about that. I gave evidence at Parliament about retaliation eviction in November 2019. And I said I'd never even heard of it. And I sat next to Shelter at the time that gave some stats which I didn't believe were right at the time, because when you serve a Section 21 notice, no one knows the reason. The reality is we did a survey and worked out 0.5% to 1% at that time when tenants asked for repairs to be carried out as Section 21 was served. That has now increased dramatically now. Yeah, the most, landlords want to do refurbs, they want to raise the rent. Section 21 going now, quite rightly, there has to be a ground. We need to make sure it's workable. And let me put yourself into a tenant's shoes. So my sister, I've been a guarantor for 14 years, single mother and part benefit. She says every time I get a WhatsApp from my landlord, I get terrible anxiety. That's the reality now that tenants are feeling. Is that fair enough to say? It is, So I understand in this day and age why Section 21's going, and I've been talking it, breathing it. I've literally just done a blog, which if you register on Landlord Zone, it's going to come out tomorrow. My view about what's happening in the market. We've seen a 132% increase in housing condition claims in the last 4 years. That's going to rise. So what will happen is you need to make sure that you're doing, of course, all your property inspections. You need to make sure your gas safety is all in place. You need to make sure you're documenting, you've got a digital trail, a paper trail of what you're doing with your property. Because you don't want the environmental health officer knocking at your door, do you? Yeah? And a lot of the time, and I've gone around with environmental health officers before. I did it with Harrow Council that were on my show. I said, I want to see a day in the life of an environmental health officer. And you go round, and I went in Harrow, and there was 7 different wards, and they had all, and I'm not going to talk about licensing because that's another conversation altogether, and there's always groans and moans when you talk about licensing. You've got discretionary and mandatory and selective, and every council's different. But when I did go round with the environmental health officer, a lot of it was just a lot of the time landlords being naive. So what I do worry about, and I'm sure Stephen and the NRLA worry about, is that when the Renters' Rights Bill come in, the biggest change, when it comes in next year, what's going to happen is those other landlords that don't come to shows like this or aren't members or aren't going to networking clubs or aren't tuning into webinars or hearing people like me speak, they're going to not know what's going to go on. They're going to get fined. You can have rent repayment orders up to 2 years if you don't licence your property. The reality is, for tenants, I'm being a bit cynical now, it could be free money. It's a bit like if you don't put the deposit in the deposit scheme, you could be fined 3 times plus. You're going to see a lot more claims coming through. You need to make sure you protect yourself. How often should you be doing your visits? Yeah? Put your hand up if you try to do a visit and your tenant won't give you access. Put your hand up. Normally a few hands go up. Yeah? How do you deal with that? How do you do a gas safety if you can't get into the property? Yeah? How can you go for possession? So we need to make sure things are workable. Yeah? Is your property too far from where you live? Should you be using a managing agent? Picking a managing agent is an art in itself. Because really your managing agent is your power team, is to make sure you can manage your decent property. The reason why you go to a managing agent is because historically they get better tenants, they find better tenants. tenants prefer dealing with agents rather than landlords. That's what they say. So the general maintenance, what's the wear and tear? You know, what's the damages? General cleanliness. Have you got a good relationship with your neighbours at your rental properties? Who engages with their neighbours at the rental properties? Put your hands up. Good. Because what are neighbours? What are neighbours? Nosy. Yeah? They are. They're nosy. Be clued up. It's your free security. If I rent out and I've got two girls that are running a brothel, I want to know about it. By the way, I've been to loads of brothels, all right? But purely professional, all right? You know, in Landlord Action, I've been doing this for 24 years. We've done the best part of about 40 to 45,000 instructions. So you name it, we've dealt with it, you know. Cannabis farms, yeah? Horrendous. You want to know about it. Have you got the right insurances in place? We got insurance. We pay up to £25,000 malicious damage. Make sure you've got your insurance in place. You know, subletting, a massive problem. You're going into a property and you see 20 pairs of shoes, but there's only a guy living there with his girlfriend. Yeah? You understand? That's why inspections are really important. You get hoarding, smoking. What are the breaches of tenancies? How many of you are sitting down and you will need to change all your tenancy agreements because they're going to be periodic 1 month tenancies? You can't ask for 6 months rent in advance. Those days are over. So how do you do it? How do you nullify it? Are you sitting down with your tenants explaining the terms of business? I think the communication from the outset, then you give them, because the tenant just wants the keys. You need to explain what's the common areas. You know, what's the utilities? When do you have to put the bins out? Landlords don't explain enough to their tenants. That's a problem as well. Okay? So you need to obviously, as landlords in 2024, you know, brand new landlords, I say, someone that's getting into the game, you guys are experienced landlords, right? Brand new landlord getting into the game should use an agent to fully manage for their first property. Do you agree with that? It's a minefield, yeah? You need to do that. And the difference between fully managed and let only is most probably about 5% anyway. You know, it's not a lot. But don't forget, you need to put a price on your time. If this is your business, work out what you're charging in your hourly rate and how many hours you spend during a tenancy. Dozens and dozens of hours, yeah? Dealing with conflicts or whatever. You know, as I said, there's 175 rules and regulation. The compliance is the biggest challenge now for the landlords going forward. We believe rates are going to come down, right, which will be good news for landlords. You know, landlord-tenant relationships are really important, but don't become too personal. Arm's length away, give them their space. Don't harass them. Don't keep knocking on the door every 5 minutes. Yeah, don't give them an excuse not to pay the rent. If a tenant doesn't want to pay the rent, they won't pay the rent. There's nothing you could do about it. You can't bang the door down at 11 o'clock at night. It's how do you deal with that? How do you nullify that? Yeah? Conflict, poor referencing. These are common scenarios that landlords go into, you know, having no protection. But putting a price on your time is really, really important. And you have a duty to be professional. This is where the step change is now, professionalism. Can you change and can you adapt? You know, as landlords, I say, if you don't need to sell, don't sell. You know, we are seeing loads of landlords selling. The NRLA are seeing, we're seeing landlords selling. We told the government the unintended consequence is, like I said, if you've got a landlord that's selling, you've got a family that end up having to leave a property where maybe the rent didn't go up for 4, 5, 6 years. Is that fair enough to say? Then all of a sudden, they might have to. What's going to happen now is if you have to go to court and serving a notice, a lot of these tenants won't be able to move. They might have to wait until eviction because they know it takes a year to get possession. And then eventually they have to find another property. Can they stay in the Ipswich area, or have the rents gone up too much? Where can they move to? That's going to be a reality. It really is. So we want to change the image. We need to get training, like you are coming today. Like you can go on an NRLA training course or engage with a council. These events are invaluable. Really, really important to go on events like this, to understand what's happening. Invest in your education. This is your business. How many of you go on a landlord website in the morning? Put your hands up. Well done. Well done. Go on Landlord Zone. Go on the NRLA. Go on Landlord Today. Yeah? Find out what's going on. Especially also what's going on in your area as well. Okay? I think also, as I understand with regard to what's happening with regard to tenant security is an issue. Tenants feel really apprehensive. So landlord compliance, what's coming in? We're going to have a landlord ombudsman. It means that every landlord has got to belong to a redress scheme. We own the property redress scheme. So trying to get 2.74 million landlords to become to a redress scheme is going to be pretty challenging. What does that mean? It means that the tenant, your consumer, has redress against you. So I rent your property out, so I'm not saying it is going to be like this, by the way. I rent your property out and I've had no hot water for 2 months because you haven't carried out repairs or done anything. What do I do? Where can I go? I can stop paying the rent, not supposed to, but where can I report? And I can report it to a redress scheme. So, you know, and it's not such a bad thing, yeah? There's mediation, there's dispute resolution, which is important. At the property redress scheme, we've got 20,000 members. But generally, it will come down to disrepairs, poor management, absent landlords, harassment, non-compliance deposits, even though deposits, you pick in deposit schemes. They'll generally be the complaints you find. Then, of course, there's also going to be a digital database. The argument is if you have a landlord redress scheme, that is a database, yeah? The government, and they've got it in Scotland, they've got it in Wales, it's happening in England. The reality is the government want to know who's a landlord and where are they a landlord, yeah? You know, they could be using it for a whole host of reasons. You most probably know why, but anyway, but that's the reality. This is about professionalism and having a register and having landlords having education makes sense. I actually believe Rent Smart Wales was actually good by that, where landlords have to do education, right? In principle, it was good. Not reality, but in principle, yeah? So, you know, and actually, yes, there's rogue landlord databases, yes, there's rogue letting agent databases, and everyone says, yes, there should be a rogue tenant database, but that's another story, another conversation for another day. And then, of course, decent home standard. This is a non-brainer for 2024. Every tenant should be living in a decent property, not a substandard property. Not a property where I was on ITV News with Dan Hewitt and he was exposing the social housing. Let me be very clear. Could be. You may not book me for next year, so I'm going to say it now, right? Social housing is worse than the private rental sector. Do we agree with that? We do. The private rental sector gets a bad rap. So I went on ITV News with Dan Hewitt, and he exposed a council property in where was it? I think it was in Croydon, and there was 2 mushrooms growing on the wall. In this day and age, no person should have to go through that and look through that. And we talk about Awab's law, the poor little boy that died in 2020 in Rochdale, right, through mould. Absolute disgrace. Okay. How do you deal with damp? How do you deal with mould? Well, now, in the new law coming in, you're going to have 14 days to rectify and deal with complaints. Quite rightly. Quite rightly. A lot of it is down to tenant education. A lot of it's down to landlord education. Is understanding. You've got to carry out works. You've got to have a paper trail. Because if you don't, the council will be on at you. Quite rightly. Your tenants should not be living. But I don't need to say that to you guys. You are the converted. It's the rogue landlords, and where do you find them? How do you expose them, and how can they be criminally charged? And what's that process? And is the time frame and the process too antiquated and too expensive? That's part of the problem as well. So look, cold air enters a room. We heat this up, then the warm air, the moisture, the condensation starts, then the moisture starts. Okay, how does it affect? It affects people, makes their asthma work. Got young kids. We have a duty of care. But we also need to educate our tenants. We also need to make sure we do the inspections in line with that as well. Not being nosy, but educating. Because also we're protecting our properties. And of course, what's going to happen in 2030? EPC's level C is going to come in, okay? Which is another conversation for another day. There's a really good website, if you look there, Indoor Air Aware. Take a picture of that, write that down. A really good educational site about condensation and about some really important facts that you get. 1 in 11 kids get asthma, in living conditions. You now have a duty as landlords to make sure that your properties don't encounter that. I'm sure you do already, okay? There's my details. We want to take some details. I'll be here until lunchtime for the Q&As as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.